be the case putting it on Vaughn. Snitched on his dead partner.
Word on the street.
They say around 5 in the morning on February 5th, Lil Durk, whose real name is Durk Derek Banks, and his co-defendant Devontae Bennett were seen on camera involved in shooting Alexander Witherspoon, a person police say they knew.
He's from Limelight, from Normal. Just because he grabbed a from O Block that rap just to help, push his little gangster image don't mean nothing, bro.
With Lil Durk's recent case unraveling, it looks like the pressure that comes with it may be intense. But what appears to be the most interesting part is that there are concerns from some quarters that he might actually be trying to save himself by throwing other folks under the bus. Now if there's one thing the streets would never respect, it's snitching.
He used Vaughn, he was using Muwap.
Some of you might still remember the whispers that were circling back then that Lil Durk might have pointed fingers at his old friend King Von over a police case from way back in 2019.
They say around 5 in the morning on February 5th, Lil Durk, whose real name is Durk Derek Banks, and his co-defendant Devontae Bennett were seen on camera involved in shooting Alexander Witherspoon, a person police say they knew.
As if that wasn't enough, after King Von's tragic death, talk started spreading that maybe Durk's supposed betrayal had something to do with it. But that's not the only story out there. Another story claims he even might have dropped hints about Young Thug in one of his tracks that led to Thug's imprisonment, sparking even more rumors of him snitching.
I could have been part of that rework called Thug and told him every nigga I shot.
With his current case, the streets are buzzing with speculation, wondering if Durk's past is catching up with him, and if he's ready to throw just about anyone under the bus to protect himself. Let's dig in. So back in March 2014, Lil Durk put out the Shira remix featuring Meek Mill and Shy Glizzy. And while having Meek on the track wasn't really the issue, the real problem lay in the fact that Shy Glizzy was on there too. And if you know anything about the history, you'll know that Shy Glizzy was this artist from DC who had a pretty rough history with OTF 300, a whole Chicago gang that Lil Durk was closely tied to. And to make things even worse, he had major beef with Lil Reese, one of Durk's closest associates, and he'd actually had a whole shootout with Blood Money, who was not only a former member of Chief Keef's camp, but also tragically lost his life to gang violence. So by including Shy Glizzy on his track, Durk kind of threw an indirect insult to his OTF 300 family, and in particular to his friend Lil Reese, which was even more controversial because Durk didn't seem to show any signs of regret or even acknowledge the tensions that he was stirring up by aligning himself with Shy Glizzy. Instead, he co-signed Glizzy with zero acknowledgement of how that might be perceived by his old crew. And then, just when the situation couldn't get any tenser, Chief Keef, who was already on thin ice with Durk, took things up a notch by sharing a song by Tyga and Game that was literally titled Chirac to LA.
Can't get touched when it's hammer time. Who the is Lil Durk?
This was a direct Lil Durk diss, and though Durk called out Keef, accusing him of being disrespectful towards Chicago by posting the track, it was pretty clear that Keef's real target was Durk himself, not the city. So predictably, Durk fired back, and this set off a chain of events that reignited the beef between them, with Chief Keef even posting the cover of Tyga and Game's song for the whole world to see. Now at that point, Lil Reese wasn't about to play referee. He made his position clear by retweeting Keef's posts, basically signaling that, from his perspective, anyone who sided against the group was as good as an op, and by collaborating with someone like Shy Glizzy, Durk was walking dangerously close to the edge, risking his place in OTF 300 and maybe even losing the respect and security he once had with the crew, which also meant he'd have to keep his distance from O Block because at that point he was liable to be treated like an enemy on sight. And though Durk has kept his distance from the area ever since, he's never hesitated to warn other rappers about stepping into O Block, even telling Meek Mill once when Meek brought up visiting the hood, "Do that at your own risk," and he was serious. Durk's loyalty to his old neighborhood has always been complicated.
Meek told me that a long time ago. He's like, I want to come to your hood. I'm like, you at your own risk, bro. I'm not gonna tell you like, you good, bro.
But even with all that tension, his connection to O Block didn't just disappear, because despite everything, Durk still had a deep-rooted attachment to the place. And when the news broke in 2021 that the 6,200 block was up for sale, he was determined to buy it. In fact, he even tweeted about it, saying, "I'll buy it, don't matter how much it is." But when the building actually went up for bidding, he couldn't get in on time, and someone else scooped it up before he could. And then, To everyone's disappointment, the new owners announced that they were planning to demolish the building, which meant a wave of displacement for the residents, many of whom had held out hope that Durk would somehow come through and save their homes. So it was a pretty heartbreaking turn of events for the people of O'Block, who had seen Durk as this beacon of hope, only to find themselves forced out of their homes when things didn't go as planned. This whole situation added yet another layer of tension, especially because the people of O'Block were looking to Durk to do something big for the neighborhood. And honestly, you have to wonder if maybe it might have been a blessing in disguise that Durk couldn't actually buy O'Block. I mean, who knows? It could have sparked an even bigger wave of gang activity with everyone trying to stake their claim and make the most of the hype surrounding Durk's purchase. And though Durk isn't originally from O'Block, he's always had this fierce loyalty to the area, defending it with a kind of passion that's led to some long-standing beefs with other artists. And ever since King Von's death in 2020, which hit Durk hard because they were incredibly close, he's been on edge about anything even remotely disrespecting his friend or the neighborhood they both represented. Recently, Charleston White stirred up the drama by claiming that Durk actually snitched on King Von to beat a case, saying, "Von was offed for beating on a smaller than him. We not shaming Durk? Durk snitched on Von to beat a case. My We not shaming Durk? He snitched on Von. My Now, whether or not people really believe that, these rumors that Durk might have betrayed Von go way back, mainly because after their 2019 arrest, Von and Durk somehow faced the same charges, but Durk walked free, which led some folks to think there had to be more to the story. Even when court documents came out earlier this year, clearly showing that Durk had stayed silent and only asked for his lawyer, people still clung to the idea that somehow Durk's actions in that case might have indirectly led to Von's eventual downfall, and the rumors just haven't died down. One of the wildest parts of this whole saga is the alleged backstory involving Von and his supposed involvement in countless gang hits across Chicago. While some of these stories about Von may sound exaggerated, they keep circulating, and people can't help but talk about all the lives supposedly lost at his hands. Take Jakara Barnes, for example, a teenage member of the 63rd Street gang known as the Gangster Disciples. She and Von actually knew each other, and despite being on opposite sides, there were rumors that he even told her he liked her and asked her to leave the gang life behind.
Yeah, he wanted to be her boyfriend. She just felt like he was trying to set her up.
But Jakara wasn't one to trust easily, and according to her best friend, she believed Von was only playing mind games, maybe even plotting against her. And unfortunately, it wasn't long after that she was offed, and word on the street was that Von was involved. It's darkly ironic, really, because Jakara herself was no stranger to violence. She was rumored to have taken out Odie Perry, a major figure from Von's side of town, and when she died, people speculated that it was payback, with some saying Von himself pulled the trigger. The story of Jakara's death became a part of Von's street legacy, feeding into his reputation as he rose to fame as a rapper. And fans even pointed to a tweet exchange between Von and Jakara right before her passing, where he supposedly hinted that he was coming for her. But then, others like King Lil J claimed that Jakara was way too tough and sharp for Von to take down, insisting she would have taken him out first if it came to that.
You know, him and K.I. at the time, they're kind of, you know.
That was false, man.
So, okay, so they not.
K.I. would have told man.
This whole debate over what really happened has just kept Von's story alive in a way that's almost mythic. He's become this larger-than-life figure, with some people doubting his street credit and others insisting he was, in fact, O'Block's king through and through. On October 12, 2012, in what turned out to be one of the bloodiest nights for Chicago's gangs, 2 young lives were tragically lost, and an additional 24 people suffered serious injuries. Among the victims was a teenager named Richard Medell, although his family revealed that his real name was actually Medell McCambry. Medell had been caught in the crossfire after he and his cousin decided to meet up with a girl in the West Woodlawn neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. Model was part of the EBT, set of the Gangster Disciples, and it was rumored that his death was just another grim consequence of the endless feud between his crew and their rivals, particularly the Black Disciples from O'Block. Police later pointed to King Von and his friends, T-Roy and J Money, as possible suspects. That night, they reportedly pulled up on Model and his cousin only 3 blocks from his house on South Rhodes Avenue, just shy of 9:30 p.m. By the time paramedics arrived, Modell and his cousin were both lying on the street. While his cousin survived, Modell sadly didn't make it. In the aftermath, King Von wasted no time taking to Twitter, where he posted a string of mocking messages aimed at Modell's death, making not so subtle suggestions that both he and T-Roy were involved. He wrote cryptically about how he and T-Roy just couldn't stop their thingy thing. A phrase that might not have meant much at the time, but later seemed like a dark admission after T-Roy was formally implicated in Modell's death. Fast forward nearly a decade, and a shocking revelation came to light. King Von himself was later identified as the primary shooter in Model's Emder. But by the time this surfaced, Von had already passed away, so justice for Model McCambry is something his family will never get, as no one will ever stand trial for his death. And then there's the story of Derek Johnson, known as P5, a figure who'd built his own reputation on Chicago's streets. Though he wasn't from hotspots like O'Block or Tookaville, he was a well-known gangster from Gyro City. Yet his life came to an abrupt end on Tookaville territory. One October day, Von, along with J Money and Big A, were supposedly on the prowl, looking to eliminate ops. And P5, who was only 23, became one of their targets. According to reports, he was shot multiple times around 9:13 a.m. on South Eberhard Avenue, and paramedics arrived shortly after to rush him to the hospital. No arrests were made, but the streets were buzzing with rumors, with some pointing fingers at King Von as the shooter, while others suspected J Money or Big A.
Von he got more than 5. He caught that quick. Nigga, he was, listen to his raps, like, he was really, like, telling y'all what he was doing.
Yet it was hard to ignore King Von's tweets just before P5's death, where he playfully suggested he was behind in his body count compared to his friend T-Roy, even joking, "I gotta catch up first, give me 2 Fridays." That tweet alone made it almost impossible for people not to suspect him, but once again, Von slipped through without any charges, and he and his crew didn't hesitate to mock P5's death on social media, relishing in the pain they'd caused. And when King Von met a similar fate in 2020, it was almost poetic, though darkly so, that P5's family saw his death as justice finally served. They openly celebrated his passing, with P5's cousin and younger brother, who had both witnessed P5's death firsthand, taking to social media to express their relief, saying they'd long prayed for a day when King Von would be taken down as well. They felt like, at long last, karma had come back around for Von, and they were more than willing to celebrate the end of someone they believed had caused their family so much pain. Rodney Stewart, better known on the streets as Boss Trail or sometimes Max Payne, was one of those figures in the Chicago gang scene who seemed larger than life. A feared and respected member of the STL EBT set of the Gangster Disciples, Boss Trail was tragically taken out on November 8, 2012, barely 2 weeks after King Von reportedly ended the life of P5, marking yet another violent chapter in an already brutal street feud. Trail was loved by his crew, so much so that after his death, they honored him by renaming his home turf as Ball City, a nod to his influence and the respect he commanded. But the story of his passing is almost cinematic, drenched in rumors and suspicions, with many believing that he was set up by someone he once loved, his ex-girlfriend Dorothy Morrison. As the tale goes, Boss Trail had been considering leaving Chicago for good, having grown weary of the endless violence and loss that came with gang life. He'd been a part of this world since he was only 12, but after seeing a close friend, King KO, manage to escape to Iowa and find peace away from the streets, Trail started to imagine a new life for himself, far from the familiar but deadly confines of Chicago. He had even taken steps to leave, bought a bus ticket, wrapped up a few loose ends, and was set to go on November 7th, but fate took a cruel turn. Just days before, he'd broken things off with Dorothy, yet somehow they ended up reconciling, and he decided to meet up with her on November 8th, the very night before he planned to leave. It's almost tragic, really. He was ready to start a new chapter, but this one decision changed everything. Instead of heading straight out of town, he agreed to meet Dorothy on the 2600 block of West 83rd Street, which was far from where he usually stayed or where his gang hung out. When he got there, it was already past midnight, and instead of finding Dorothy, he found an ambush waiting for him. King Von, T-Roy, J Money, and Boss Top, all from O'Block, were there instead. According to reports, they attacked him, leaving him in the street to be found hours later.
Death site of Max Payne, aka Boss Trail. He was gunned down in this alley right here.
When authorities arrived around 6:50 a.m. the next morning, they discovered him with his gun still tucked under his body, as if he'd tried to defend himself. And in his pocket, they found the bus ticket to Iowa, a chilling reminder of how close he'd come to escaping this life. During the investigation, Dorothy was questioned, but she didn't offer much help. While she shared memories of how Trail had once confided in her about his dreams of leaving Chicago, saying how they'd talk about their future and he'd tell her how he believed there was nothing for him in the city except jail or worse. She clammed up when asked about any suspects or details that might have led to his curse. She simply told investigators that she didn't feel comfortable discussing it, which only fueled more suspicions. Trail's aunt, Andrea Johnson, later expressed a strange sense of satisfaction that Dorothy hadn't cooperated with the authorities, almost seeing it as a twisted loyalty to Boss Trail's code of silence, though she blamed Dorothy for the case remaining unsolved. Meanwhile, on the streets, it didn't take long for people to speculate that Vaughn and his crew were responsible for the hit, a suspicion that stuck for years as Boss Trail's story turned into a cautionary tale of what could happen to anyone, even those with one foot out the door. All of these swirling speculations around Lil Durk, especially when it comes to whether he might have known more about his late friend Vaughn's activities than he ever let on, seemed to just keep building this sense that maybe Durk was ready to distance himself at all costs, even if that meant letting some uncomfortable truth slip here and there. And really, the whole idea of Durk being labeled as a snitch didn't even start with Vaughn. He's had this shadow hanging over him in other cases too, like the one involving Young Thug. In a track, Durk dropped a line that got everyone buzzing, saying, "I could have been part of that Rico. I called Thugger, told him every ninja I shot." Now that line could mean a million different things, or it could just be Durk rapping. But considering Young Thug's case is so entangled with the idea of lyrics being evidence, you can bet that people are going to see it as a potential slip-up, especially on the streets where every word gets picked apart and some took it as Durk snitching, even if he didn't mean it that way.
I could have been part of that Rico. I called Thugger, told him every I shot.
But then, right around the same time, Durk seemed to be trying to control how he's perceived, like he's suddenly really aware of how he's seen and wants to change the narrative. In August, he posted a photo on Instagram with a caption that seemed almost like a plea, saying, "Don't label me nothing outside of a man, a father, and a 1000% Muslim." It's like he's drawing a line, telling the world he's moved past the streets and into a different chapter, something that's more about family and faith than the gang life he came up in. Yet, with all these statements, songs, and labels swirling around, you can't help but wonder, if Durk is really serious about turning over a new leaf, just how many more people might end up exposed, even unintentionally, if he decides to speak his truth in full. Because if there's anything the streets and his fans know by now, it's that sometimes words have a way of revealing more than you'd think. And maybe, just maybe, there are still some revelations that could shake things up in ways nobody's fully prepared for.